Hello, hello, hello. It's me, Mrs. Wisniewski. I am back. And today we're going to be doing a little review again. We are going to be doing function notation, which is review from Algebra 1A. We did touch upon it this year, earlier in the year, but it is review from last year. It is also something that you're going to need for whatever math class you take next year. It's a pretty popular topic. So we're talking about function notation, and it really is just a new type of notation. This is review from 1A, so when I say new, I don't mean new, but I mean new from what we usually use. We're used to seeing equations as y equals 4x minus 1, and function notation looks like this. F of x equals 4x minus 1. Nothing has changed in the equation. We have just replaced the y with f of x. It is helpful to remember that y is the same as f of x. You'll see y equals f of x, the same thing, but I like to say y is the same as f of x. So I sort of already gave it away, but it is read as f of x. It's almost like the parenthesis stands for the word x, okay? And f of x is the output. It's what comes out. It's the answers. And x is the input. So as far as evaluating a function, which is really what we're going to do this whole lesson, it's really substitution. Function notation is especially useful for finding a value in the range that corresponds to a certain domain value. Really, we're going to take a number and we're going to plug it in. It says, example, if f of x equals 4x minus 1, find f of negative 7. Now, do you notice that the negative 7 is in the parentheses? It's in the same spot as the x. So really, they're saying that x equals negative 7, evaluate it. So the way that I would write that is f of negative 7, so I'm just replacing the x with a negative 7, equals 4x minus 1, and now I'm going to plug in that negative 7 in for x, and I'm going to evaluate that. Be careful, use your calculators, it's easy to make a mistake, and you should get negative 29. So in the next section for examples, we're just going to keep plugging in what we have for x. So number 1 says f of x equals x plus 7, find f of 5. So I'm going to plug in my f of 5, and now I'm going to substitute or replace my x with the 5. And when I add those together, I get 12. So f of 5 equals 12. Basically, that's saying when x is 5, the equation is equal to 12. On number 2, I am going to use a g. So you notice how we were saying f of x, and if you look at 2, it says g of x, then 3 switches to h of x, 4 goes back to f of x. It's all exactly the same. Nothing changes. They just like to change up the letter. So I have g of x equals 3x minus 8, and they want us to find g of negative 3. So I'm going to write this as g of negative 3 equals 3x minus 8, and now I'm going to replace my x with negative 3, and Be careful with that because you have negatives. You want to do your multiplication first, but when you simplify that, put it all in your calculator, you should get negative 17. Now on number 3, we have a fraction. Don't be afraid of it. You know, you should have a calculator. If you don't, I can show you how to do it without it, but it's not as scary as it really looks to be. So this says h of x equals 2/3 x minus 1. Find h of 9. So I'm going to write this as h of 9 equals 2/3 x. And I'm going to write it again and plug in my 9. I didn't really draw attention to this before, but I should do it now just because it's going to really come up later. But notice when I just plugged in my 9, I put parentheses around it. Okay, because this means 2/3 times x. So when I put parentheses around it, I'm saying 2/3 times 9. If I didn't put those parentheses there, it might look a little weird like this. Like, what does that mean really? Okay, and back on question 2, I didn't mention it, but I did put parentheses around the negative 3 that I plugged in, again because it was multiplication, but also because there was a negative there. And you don't want it to look like 3 minus 3. All right, so whenever you plug something in moving forward, we're going to put parentheses around the number that we're plugging in. That will eliminate for any mistakes. Now I'm going to evaluate h of 9. And if you have a calculator, just put in 2/3 times 9. Remember, we have that app. Also, if you don't have a calculator, you could do 2/3 times 9 over 1. Make it a fraction. You multiply across the top and get 18. Multiply across the bottom and get 3. And when you do 18 divided by 3, you get 6. So h of 9 equals 6. Now, moving along to number 4, it says f of x equals x squared minus x, and they want us to find f of negative 4. Now, notice that in my equation, I have 2 x's this time. That is okay. It just means that I'm plugging in the negative 4 twice. So I have f of negative 4 equals x squared minus x. Now I'm going to plug in my 4 for both of those x's. And a reminder, you want to put parentheses around the 4 each time that you plug it in, especially because it's negative, but when you get the squares in there, it gets really complicated. So from here, I suggest you put that in your calculator, and when you do that, you get 20. If you did not get that, please double check. It definitely is 20. On number 5, we have a trinomial. So it's getting a little bit more complicated, but we're going to follow the same procedure. This says f of x equals negative x squared plus 6x minus 4. Find f of 5. So I'm writing f of 5 equals negative x squared plus 6x minus 4. Now, this is where it is super important to put in a parenthesis. The negative is not part of what you're plugging in. So when I plug in my 5, I need parentheses around just my 5. And believe it or not, that will affect your outcome if you don't put those parentheses, okay? So I end up with negative 5 squared plus 6 times 5 minus 4. Now this whole line you can put in your calculator and you should get 1. Please double check that, either if you didn't get it correct or I was moving a little too fast for you. Please make sure that you're getting a 1. If you are getting 51 and you can't figure out why, please send me a chat and I will help you with it. So, number 6 has a fraction, another fraction. It's okay, we can handle them. G of x equals -1/2 x plus 9, and find g of -8. So I have g of -8 equals -1/2 x plus 9. I'm going to plug in my -8, so I have -1/2 times a -8. Notice how I put parentheses around my -8 plus 9. And then when you put all of that in your calculator, you should get 13. Number 7 says f of x equals 2x squared plus 4x minus 9. Find f of -5. What I would like for you to do is to take a minute on your own and to plug in that -5 how we've been doing it in the previous problems. Please go ahead and do that. This is the step that I got next. And this is what I got when I plugged it in. Notice I have 2 areas where I plugged in my -5, and both times I have parentheses around that -5 to make sure I don't make a mistake when calculating in my calculator. Now go ahead, take a second, and see what you get on your calculator. And hopefully you're getting 21. Now, 8 looks a little crazy. It says g of x equals the absolute value of x minus x squared, and find g of -7. So even though there is something new there, I'm still going to follow the same step. Going to write g of -7 equals the absolute value of x minus x squared, and now I'm going to plug in the -7. So I'm still going to put parentheses around my -7. Okay, now you actually can put this whole thing in your calculator from here. Just for the sake of it being so many steps, I'm going to simplify first. So I have -7 minus 49 if I do -7 squared. Okay, and that is going to give me a -56. Now, what is absolute value? It's how far from 0 on the number line, or just the positive. So it's a positive 56. Now, you could have put this entire step in your calculator. The only difference is you need to know how to get that in your calculator. And you're going to press math over to NUM, and you're going to choose number 1, ABS, and then it'll look like this, and you have to type everything in there, and you should get a 56. On the next page, 9 and 10 look a little funky because there's a couple of things going on there. So I am actually going to skip skip 9 and 10, and we're going to go ahead to number 11. The directions for 11 say, for questions 11 through 16, use the functions to the left. And then if I look at number 11, it says f of 4 plus 9. By itself, that looks very strange. But if I look to the left and I see these equations on the left, I have 3 different equations. One is f of x, one is g of x, and one is h of x. So if 11 wants f of 4 plus 9, it looks like they only want me to consider this equation. Now that little plus 9 on the end is a little weird. That's new. So I will take you through that. I'm going to start off the same way. F of 4 equals 8 minus 3x. I'm just pulling that equation over. And what I have here though is I have that plus 9 tacked onto the end. So all I did was I pulled over the f of x equation from the left. I did that the same, and I added the plus 9 onto the end. Now I'm going to plug in my 4. And now from here, you should be able to evaluate that whole thing, and you get 5. Now, when I look at equation 12, it looks like negative 2 times g of negative 5. Okay, so it looks like we're using the g equation on the left. So I'm going to do g of negative 5, just like we've been doing. I'm going to pull over that equation of x squared plus 2x, and I left a little space there, which is really where this negative 2 is coming from. So I'm now plugging in my negative 5. And now you're just going to evaluate that whole thing. And I just want you to know I'm going to keep this 2 out front and evaluate what's in the parentheses first, okay? And that should give you a negative 30 as your final answer. The reason why I did that is because this negative 2 is being multiplied by this entire equation, so you need to evaluate that first. Number 13 says g of 4 plus g of negative 1. So I'm going to kind of just draw a line here for now, and I'm really going to do g of 4 and g of negative 1, and then I'm going to add them together at the end. So it's kind of just like 2 separate equations that we're going to add together. So I have g of 4, and that means I'm using this equation on the left again. So g of 4 equals x squared plus 2x. G of 4 equals, I'm going to plug in my 4, and so g of 4 equals 24. Now I'm basically doing the same thing with g of negative 1. Same equation. So I have x squared plus 2x watch your parentheses here. And when I evaluate that, I get negative 1. Now I'm not done though. This says, let me just erase this, g of 4 plus g of negative 1. So I'm going to do it to the left just so I have room. So I'm going to take my g of 4, Well, that's 24. And I'm going to add it to my g of -1, which is -1. When I add those together, I get 23. That is my final answer for number 13. Okay, we are going to skip 14. I feel like 11, 12, and 13 are complicated enough. But we are going to do 15 and 16. Okay. So on 15 and 16, we are still referring to the equations on the left. You notice mine's magically moved down. But this question is a little different. It says, if f of x equals -13. This is different. This does not say f of -13, right? We're not going to plug in the -13 like we've been doing. It's different. What it's saying is the entire equation f of x is equal to -13. Or this right here is equal to -13. So it is -13. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull over my f of x equation. And I can't substitute in x, but I'm going to substitute in this -13 in for this entire f of x. So I have -13 equals 8 minus 3x. And the directions say find x, which means we're going to have to solve a little bit. So I really have a two-step equation, which we reviewed a couple weeks ago. So I need to get x alone. I'm going to subtract 8 from both sides. And that is going to give me on the left side a -21 equals, my 8's cancel, and that's a -3x. Divide both sides by -3. I get a 7 equals x. Okay, so 16 says if h of x equals 39, find x. So it is very similar to question number 15, where the 39 is not where the x is, but the entire h of x equals 39. It means we're going to be using the h of x equation on the left, which we have not used yet. And I'm going to copy that over here. So h of x equals -5/2 x minus 1. Now, h of x is equal to 39. So I'm going to replace the entire h of x with the 39. From here, I'm going to solve for x. So I'm adding 1 to both sides. It's going to give me 40. Divide both sides by -5/2. Those cancel. X equals, and you in your calculator you can do 40 divided by -5/2, and you should get a -16. All right, 17 says application, which is really just a fancy word for word problem, but don't let it freak you out because it is really just a continuation onto what we've been doing. Anthropologists use the length of certain bones of human skeleton to estimate the height of the living person. One of these bones is the femur. To estimate the height in centimeters of a female with a femur length of x, the function h of x equals 61.41 plus 2.32x can be used. Find h of 46 and explain its meaning. Okay, I mean, let's kind of decipher this here. So we have an equation that's already given to us. That's nice, right? They want us to find h of 46, and they do give us this background on what it is that they're doing to estimate the height of a person based on their bones, but that part alone is what we've been doing. The very last part where it says explain, that might require some thought, but I'm going to do the same. I'm going to do h of 46 equals 61 and 41 hundredths plus 2 and 32 hundredths x. And now I'm going to plug in my 46 with parentheses. And when I put that whole thing in, you should get 168 and 13 hundredths. Now, does that mean that the girl was 168 feet? I would hope not. That's a little tall. That might be some kind of giant. So let me go back and see if it tells me. Oh, it says to estimate the height in centimeters. So that's centimeters. All right. The last part says explain its meaning. So we know that if I go back and look for x, which is here, that is the length of the femur. So that tells me that when they put a 46 there, that's the length of the femur. So a female's femur of 46 centimeters indicates what? What does that equation let you know? How tall the person actually is. So indicates she is 168 and 13 hundredths centimeters tall. All right. The last little bit here is graphing. I actually really like these. They are pretty quick to figure out. So notice I have two graphs here. I don't have any equations. I only have the graphs. And the directions say, given the graph of f of x, find each function value. And if you look at number 18, I have a parabola there. And I have 4 little parts to do. So part A says f of -3. So it's basically saying when your x is -3, because remember, see where my x is in f of x, the -3 is in the same spot. So when x is -3, what is your y? Or what is the equation equal to? So I don't have an equation to plug this into. So instead, because it's an x is -3, on the x-axis, I'm going to go to -3. Now, I'm going to put a little mark there just so you can see where I am. Normally, you would not do that because you don't really need to, but that's where I am on the x-axis. So in this case, I'm going to go up until I hit a spot on that parabola, which is right there. Okay, so the coordinates there are -3, 2. So basically, when x is -3, my y or my graph lies on 2. And that is how that is done. So for B, it's saying f of 1. So I'm going to go over to 1 on my x-axis. I'm just going to put a little mark there so you can see, and I'm going to go up again till I hit a point on the parabola. And that's right there. So that is the point 1, 2. So when my x is 1, my y is 2. Again, and that can happen. You can have 2 of the same answers. C is f of 0. So on the x-axis, I don't actually go anywhere because 0 is there. But I'm going to go up again till I hit the parabola, which would be right there. Be careful with the way you write the coordinates. So that's the coordinates 0, 5. So when my x is 0, my y is 5. And the last one here is f of 2. So when I go over to the 2, this time though, I can't go up because I will never hit the graph. I'm going to go down until I hit the graph, which would be right here. So those coordinates are 2, -3. So when my x is 2, my y is -3. So now looking at number 19, again, it's a graph. That's actually a sine graph, but we're not going to worry about that. So I'm going to do f of -4. So I'm going to go all the way to the -4 and go up till I hit the graph, which is there. And that's the point -4, 2. So when f is -4, my y is 2. F of 0, well, I'm going to do 0 on the graph. And I don't go anywhere, so that is also 0. F of 2, so I'm going to go over to the 2, and then I'm going to go down this time. So that's the point 2, -2. So that's equal to -2. And the last one is f of 5, which is here. And when I go down, that's the point 5, -1. So f of 5 is -1. All right, so a quick little note about your homework. It all looks okay. Notice that on this section here, it's an absolute value. Remember, it's math, right arrow to NUM, and then it's number 1. I do want you to skip 13, 14, and 15. Those are the ones we skipped over in the notes. And then if you look at the second page, I'm going to have you skip 22 and 23, just to shorten it up a bit.
My mom always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get.